Imagine discovering that your loving husband of 15 years has been plotting to destroy your life, learning that you have only months to live due to a rare heart condition, and then being falsely committed to a psychiatric facility. Now picture that in your darkest hour, you find out your spouse is living lavishly with his mistress, spending the fortune you built while you fight for your sanity and your life. How would you react? Would you spend your remaining time in despair, or would you use your last ounces of strength to expose the truth and leave a lasting legacy? This is Kaylee Henderson's story. Stay until the end and be moved by this emotional tale filled with shocking twists that will leave you breathless. The golden California sun peeked through the curtains of a modest two-story house in the heart of San Jose, casting a warm glow on Kaylee Henderson's sleeping face. At 42, she was a vision of serenity, her chestnut hair fanned out on the pillow, a small smile playing on her lips even in slumber. As the alarm clock chimed, her hazel eyes fluttered open, immediately filling with warmth as they landed on the empty space beside her. "Spencer must be up already," she murmured to herself, stretching languidly before swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Her bare feet touched the cool hardwood floor, a stark contrast to the plush carpeting she'd grown up with in her family's mansion. Kaylee padded downstairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee guiding her to the kitchen. There, hunched over his laptop at the breakfast nook, sat Spencer Henderson, his salt and pepper hair slightly disheveled, brow furrowed in concentration. "Morning, love," Kaylee called out, moving to pour herself a cup of coffee. "You're up early. Everything okay at the office?" Spencer's head snapped up, a fleeting look of irritation crossing his face before it smoothed into a smile. "Just some last-minute preparations for the Morgan account," he replied, closing his laptop with a soft click. "You know how it is. Always something urgent in corporate law." Kaylee nodded, a small frown creasing her forehead. She'd never quite understood the intricacies of Spencer's work, but she trusted him implicitly. After all, they'd been married for 15 years, and he'd always been her rock, her shelter from the storm of publicity that came with being the sole heiress to the Prescott fortune. As she sipped her coffee, Kaylee's gaze wandered around their kitchen. It was modest by Silicon Valley standards, but to her it was perfect. The worn butcher block countertops, the slightly outdated appliances, the mismatched mugs in the open shelving, each item told a story of their life together, a life built on love rather than luxury. "I was thinking," Kaylee began, setting down her mug, "maybe we could take a drive up to Santa Cruz this weekend. The weather's supposed to be beautiful, and it's been ages since we've had a day just for us." Spencer's fingers twitched almost imperceptibly, his eyes darting to his closed laptop before meeting Kaylee's hopeful gaze. "This weekend? I'm not sure, Kay. The Morgan case is really heating up, and I might need to go into the office." Disappointment flickered across Kaylee's face, but she quickly masked it with an understanding smile. "Of course I understand. Maybe next weekend then." Spencer nodded non-committally, already reaching for his laptop again. Kaylee turned away, busying herself with preparing breakfast, trying to ignore the knot of unease forming in her stomach. It wasn't the first time Spencer had begged off their plans lately, citing work commitments. She understood the demands of his job, of course, but something felt off. As she cracked eggs into a bowl, Kaylee's mind wandered to her childhood. Growing up as the only child of tech mogul Richard Prescott had been a life of unimaginable privilege, but also intense scrutiny. Every move she made was fodder for the gossip columns, every friendship questioned for ulterior motives. It wasn't until she met Spencer in college that she felt truly seen for who she was, not what she represented. Their courtship had been a whirlwind, much to the chagrin of San Jose's elite. Spencer was from a middle-class family in Fresno with no connections to speak of. The tabloids had a field day, speculating about his intentions, but Kaylee knew better. Spencer loved her for her kindness, her passion for art, her desire to make a difference in the world, not for the fortune she stood to inherit. When they married, Kaylee had insisted on living modestly. She wanted to build a life with Spencer based on their shared values, not her family's wealth. They bought this house in a quiet San Jose neighborhood, far from the mansions of Atherton, where Kaylee had grown up. She took a job as an art teacher at a local community center, finding fulfillment in nurturing creativity in others rather than living off her trust fund. A loud sigh from Spencer pulled Kaylee from her reverie. She glanced over her shoulder to see him rubbing his temples, a deep frown etched on his face. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked, concern coloring her voice. Spencer looked up, his blue eyes unreadable. "Just a headache. Think I might need to lie down for a bit before heading to the office." Kaylee nodded, moving to the medicine cabinet to fetch some aspirin. As she filled a glass with water, she couldn't shake the feeling that Spencer was keeping something from her. It wasn't like him to be so distant, so preoccupied. "Here," she said softly, placing the pills and water in front of him. "Why don't you rest for a while? I can call your assistant and let her know you'll be in a bit late." Spencer's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with unexpected force. "No," he said sharply, then immediately softened his tone. "I mean, no need for that. I'll be fine. I'll head in now, actually. Get an early start." Before Kaylee could respond, Spencer was on his feet, gathering his things with unusual haste. She watched, bewildered, as he shrugged on his jacket and headed for the door. "Spencer?" she called out, her voice small and uncertain. He paused at the threshold, turning to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. For a moment, Kaylee thought she saw a flicker of guilt, regret, but then it was gone, replaced by his usual confident smile. "I'll be home for dinner," he said, his tone casual. "Don't wait up if I'm late, okay?" And then he was gone, leaving Kaylee standing in their kitchen, the half-prepared breakfast forgotten on the counter. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling cold despite the warm California morning. As she moved to clear away the breakfast things, her gaze fell on a framed photo on the windowsill. It was from their wedding day. Kaylee in a simple white dress, Spencer in a rented tux, both of them beaming with joy and promise. She picked up the frame, running her finger over Spencer's smiling face. "What's going on with you?" she whispered to the photograph, a sense of foreboding settling over her like a heavy blanket. Outside, the sounds of their neighborhood coming to life filtered through the open window. A lawnmower hummed in the distance. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby yard. A car horn honked impatiently. Life in San Jose was moving forward as it always did, but for Kaylee, standing alone in her kitchen with questions swirling in her mind, it felt as though her world had tilted slightly on its axis. She set the photo down and moved to the living room, sinking onto the worn leather couch that she and Spencer had picked out together in their first year of marriage. Her eyes roamed over the modest furnishings, each piece a testament to the life they'd built together. The watercolor landscapes on the walls were her own work, encouraged by Spencer's unwavering support of her artistic pursuits. The bookshelf in the corner was crammed with law textbooks and art history tomes, a physical representation of their shared interests and individual passions. But now, in the wake of Spencer's abrupt departure, these familiar surroundings felt somehow different, as if the comfortable life they'd crafted was suddenly a stage set, and Kaylee was an actor who'd forgotten her lines. She reached for her phone, hesitating for a moment before pulling up her cousin Ivana's number. If anyone could help her make sense of the unease gnawing at her, it was Ivana. But as her finger hovered over the call button, Kaylee paused. What would she even say? That her husband was acting strange? That she had a feeling something was wrong but couldn't put her finger on what? With a sigh, she set the phone down. She was probably overreacting. Spencer had always been dedicated to his work, and this Morgan case was clearly important. She was letting her imagination run wild, influenced by too many of the dramatic plot lines in the novels piled on her nightstand. Determined to shake off her melancholy mood, Kaylee decided to channel her energy into something productive. She had a class to teach at the community center that afternoon, and she always felt better when she was creating. Moving to her small home studio, she began gathering supplies for the day's lesson on color theory. As she sorted through tubes of paint and packets of brushes, Kaylee's mind drifted to the students she'd be seeing that day. There was Maria, a retired nurse who'd always wanted to try watercolors, and Jack, a teenager who'd initially come to fulfill community service hours but had discovered a genuine talent for abstract expressionism. Their enthusiasm and progress brought Kaylee a sense of purpose that no amount of wealth could match. It was this work, this ability to make a difference in people's lives, that had always made Kaylee feel truly rich. She thought back to the arguments she'd had with her father when she'd first announced her intention to teach art instead of joining the family business. Richard Prescott couldn't understand why his daughter, heir to a tech fortune, would choose to spend her days in a community center instead of a corner office. But Spencer had understood. He'd supported her decision, even when it meant living on a much tighter budget than her trust fund would have allowed. "Your happiness is worth more than any amount of money," he'd told her, and in that moment Kaylee had known she'd made the right choice in marrying him. Now, as she packed up her supplies and headed out to her modest hybrid car, Kaylee clung to that memory. Whatever was going on with Spencer, whatever secrets he might be keeping, she had to believe that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. As she navigated the bustling streets of San Jose, Kaylee tried to focus on the day ahead. But even as she smiled and waved at familiar faces in the community center parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her world. The California sun still shone brightly overhead, but for Kaylee Henderson, shadows were beginning to gather on the horizon of her once perfect life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Silicon Valley, Spencer Henderson's sleek BMW pulled into the parking lot of an upscale San Jose hotel. He glanced furtively around before exiting the car, adjusting his tie and smoothing back his salt and pepper hair. With practiced ease, he strode through the lobby, nodding curtly at the receptionist before making his way to the elevator. On the 12th floor, he rapped softly on room 1206. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a stunning young woman with long blonde hair and piercing green eyes. Annabelle Carter, barely 28, was the antithesis of Kaylee in every way. Ambitious, ruthless, and utterly captivating. "You're late," she purred, pulling Spencer into the room and closing the door behind him. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." Spencer's lips curved into a cold smile as he pulled Annabelle close. "About you? Never. About our plan? It's all I can think about." As they fell onto the plush king-size bed, thoughts of Kaylee and their modest home in San Jose faded from Spencer's mind. Here, in this luxurious hotel room with Annabelle, he could almost taste the wealthy lifestyle he'd always craved, the lifestyle that had always been just out of reach, thanks to Kaylee's insistence on living modestly. "Did you make the call?" Annabelle asked later, tracing lazy circles on Spencer's chest. He nodded, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "Dr. Reeves is on board. He owes me a favor from that malpractice suit I got him out of last year. He'll back up our story about Kaylee's mental instability when the time comes." Annabelle's green eyes glittered with malicious glee. "Perfect. And I've been laying the groundwork at her precious community center. You should hear the whispers already. Poor, unstable Kaylee, losing her grip on reality." Spencer chuckled darkly. "You're brilliant, you know that. In a few months we'll have control of Kaylee's entire fortune and no one will be the wiser." As they continued to plot, miles away in their modest San Jose home, Kaylee tossed and turned in her empty bed, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next few weeks saw a subtle but persistent shift in Kaylee's world. It started small. A concerned glance from a fellow teacher at the community center, a whispered conversation that abruptly stopped when she entered the room. At first, Kaylee brushed it off as paranoia, a lingering effect of her unsettling feelings about Spencer's recent behavior. But then came the incident with Mrs. Patel, one of her most devoted students. The elderly woman had been attending Kaylee's watercolor classes for years, her kind smile and encouraging words a constant source of joy. But on this particular Tuesday, as Kaylee demonstrated a new technique for capturing the play of light on water, she noticed Mrs. Patel watching her with an odd expression. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Patel?" Kaylee asked, setting down her brush. The older woman hesitated, her eyes darting around the room before landing back on Kaylee. I'm just a bit concerned, dear. Are you feeling well? You seem a bit distracted lately." Kaylee blinked in surprise. "I'm fine, really." "Why do you ask?" Mrs. Patel shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Well, it's just, there's been talk, you see, about your condition." "My condition?" Kaylee echoed, bewildered. "What condition?" But Mrs. Patel simply shook her head, refusing to elaborate. The rest of the class passed in a blur, with Kaylee acutely aware of the furtive glances and hushed whispers around her. As the weeks wore on, similar incidents began to pile up. The barista at her favorite coffee shop, who had always greeted her by name, now watched her warily as she placed her order. Her neighbor, usually quick with a friendly wave, hurried inside when he saw her approaching. Even at home, things were becoming increasingly strained. Spencer was spending more and more time at the office, and when he was home, he seemed distant and preoccupied. Kaylee tried to talk to him about the strange atmosphere at the community center, but he brushed off her concerns. "You're imagining things, Kay," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "Maybe you're just stressed. Why don't you take a break from teaching for a while?" The suggestion, innocuous as it seemed, sent a chill down Kaylee's spine. Take a break from teaching? The very idea was absurd. Her work at the community center was her passion, her purpose. Why would Spencer, who had always supported her career, suddenly suggest she step back? Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Kaylee, Spencer and Annabelle's plan was progressing smoothly. Annabelle, using her charm and a carefully crafted sob story, had ingratiated herself with several of Kaylee's colleagues at the community center. "It's just so hard to watch," Annabelle confided to Sarah, the center's administrator, her eyes brimming with fake tears. Spencer's at his wit's end, trying to get her help, but she refuses to admit there's a problem. And now with her erratic behavior at the center, "I'm just worried about the students, you know." Sarah, a kind-hearted woman in her 50s, patted Annabelle's hand sympathetically. "We've all noticed the change in Kaylee. It's heartbreaking, really. Such a talented artist and so generous with her time. But lately, well, we're all concerned." This conversation and others like it spread through the community center like wildfire. Soon everyone from the janitor to the board of directors was watching Kaylee with a mixture of pity and unease. Dr. Reeves, true to his word, began to lay his own groundwork. At a charity gala for the local hospital, he made a point of seeking out Richard Prescott, Kaylee's father. "Mr. Prescott," he said, his voice low and concerned, "I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but have you noticed anything off about Kaylee lately?" Richard, caught off guard, furrowed his brow. "Off? What do you mean?" Dr. Reeves sighed, the picture of a concerned medical professional. "I probably shouldn't say anything doctor-patient confidentiality and all that, but as a family friend, let's just say I'm worried. Spencer's been in touch, and some of the behaviors he's described, well, they're concerning, to say the least." The seed of doubt planted, Doctor. Reeves moved on, leaving Richard Prescott staring after him, a look of worry etched on his face. As summer turned to fall, Kaylee felt as though she was living in a waking nightmare. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, heard whispers behind her back. Her classes at the community center, once a source of joy and fulfillment, now felt like ordeals to be endured. One crisp October morning, Kaylee arrived at the center to find Sarah waiting for her, a grave expression on her face. "Kaylee dear, can we talk in my office?" Heart pounding, Kaylee followed Sarah into the small, cluttered room. The administrator gestured for her to sit, then perched on the edge of her desk, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Kaylee, we've known each other for a long time, and I hope you know how much we all care about you here," Sarah began, her voice gentle but firm. "But lately, well, there have been some concerns raised about your behavior in class." Kaylee felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. "Concerns? What kind of concerns?" Sarah sighed, looking pained. "Some students have reported feeling uncomfortable. They say you've been acting erratically, saying strange things. And then there was the incident last week with the broken easel." "The broken easel?" Kaylee interjected, confused. "That was an accident. I tripped, that's all." But Sarah was already shaking her head. "Kaylee, 3 students saw you push it over in what they described as a fit of rage. You were shouting about colors attacking you." Kaylee stared at Sarah in disbelief. That's not true. That never happened. Who told you this?" "It doesn't matter who reported it," Sarah said softly. "What matters is that we're worried about you, Kaylee. We think it might be best if you took some time off, to rest, to get whatever help you might need." The words hit Kaylee like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest, to defend herself, but the look of pity and fear in Sarah's eyes stopped her cold. Without another word, she stood and walked out of the office, out of the community center, feeling as though her entire world was crumbling around her. That evening, as Kaylee sat in her darkened living room, trying to make sense of what was happening, she heard Spencer's key in the lock. He entered, briefcase in hand, and stopped short when he saw her. "Kay, why are you sitting in the dark?" Kaylee looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "They asked me to leave the community center," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They think I'm unstable." Spencer's face registered shock, then concern. He set down his briefcase and moved to sit beside her on the couch. "Oh, Kay," he murmured, pulling her into his arms. "I'm so sorry, but maybe this is for the best." You have been under a lot of stress lately." Kaylee pulled away, staring at him in disbelief. "For the best. Spencer, they think I'm losing my mind, and I'm not. I don't understand what's happening, why everyone is acting this way." Spencer's face softened into a look of sympathy that, had Kaylee been less distraught, she might have recognized as rehearsed. "Sweetheart, I know this is hard to hear, but I've been worried about you too. Your behavior has been erratic. I thought it was just stress, but now—" "No," Kaylee said, shaking her head vehemently. "No, Spencer, not you too. You know me. You know I'm not— I wouldn't—" But Spencer was already pulling out his phone. "I think it's time we got you some help, Kay. I'm going to call Dr. Reeves. He's an old friend and he specializes in these kinds of situations." As Spencer stepped into the other room to make the call, Kaylee sat frozen on the couch, feeling as though she was watching her life spiral out of control from somewhere outside her body. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? And why did it feel like everyone, even Spencer, was suddenly a stranger? Little did Kaylee know, but across town, in a sleek high-rise apartment, Annabelle was celebrating their progress with a glass of expensive champagne. "To us," she toasted, clinking her glass against Spencer's. "And to Kaylee's millions, which will soon be ours." Spencer smirked, taking a sip of the bubbly liquid. "We're not there yet, but we're close. Tomorrow, we move to the next phase." The next morning dawned bright and clear, but for Kaylee it felt as though a dark cloud had settled over her world. She moved through the house like a ghost, unable to shake the feeling of unreality that had gripped her since the confrontation at the community center. Spencer had left early, citing an important meeting, but not before reminding her of her appointment with Dr. Reeves that afternoon. "It's for the best, Kay," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm. "Dr. Reeves can help you sort through whatever's going on." As the hours ticked by, Kaylee found herself growing increasingly anxious. She didn't need to see a psychiatrist. She wasn't unstable or erratic or any of the things people seemed to think she was, but how could she prove it when no one seemed willing to listen to her? At precisely 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Kaylee opened it to find a young woman standing on her porch, a friendly smile on her face. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Annabelle Carter. Your husband asked me to drive you to your appointment with Dr. Reeves." Kaylee frowned, confused. "Spencer didn't mention sending anyone. I can drive myself." Annabelle's smile never wavered. "He was concerned you might be too anxious to drive safely. Please let me help. It's no trouble at all." Something about the woman's overly sweet tone set Kaylee on edge, but she couldn't put her finger on why. Reluctantly, she grabbed her purse and followed Annabelle to a waiting car. The drive to Dr. Reeves' office was tense, with Kaylee staring out the window, lost in thought, while Annabelle kept up a stream of cheerful chatter. As they pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript office building, Kaylee felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to flee. "You know," she said, her hand on the door handle, "I'm feeling much better. I don't think I need this appointment after all." But Annabelle was quicker. Before Kaylee could react, the younger woman had come around to her side of the car and gripped her arm firmly. Now, Mrs. Henderson," she said, her voice losing its friendly edge. "Let's not make this difficult. Dr. Reeves is expecting you." Kaylee tried to pull away, her heart racing. "Let go of me. Who are you? What's going on?" Her raised voice attracted the attention of a small group of people entering the building. Annabelle's grip on Kaylee's arm tightened painfully as she plastered on a sympathetic smile for the onlookers. "It's all right, everyone," she called out. "Mrs. Henderson is just having one of her episodes. We'll get her inside and calm down in no time." As the strangers nodded and murmured in understanding, Kaylee felt a wave of panic wash over her. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. She had to get away, had to find someone who would listen, who would believe her. With a sudden burst of strength, she wrenched her arm free from Annabelle's grasp and took off running across the parking lot. She could hear Annabelle shouting behind her, could hear the pounding of footsteps in pursuit, but she didn't dare look back. Kaylee ran blindly, her only thought to put as much distance between herself and Annabelle as possible. She darted across streets, narrowly avoiding cars that honked angrily as she passed. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but still she ran, driven by a primal fear she couldn't quite name. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, Kaylee found herself in a small park. She collapsed onto a bench, gasping for air, her mind reeling. What was happening? Why was Annabelle so insistent on getting her to that appointment? And why did it feel like everyone in the world was suddenly against her? As her breathing slowly returned to normal, Kaylee fumbled in her purse for her phone. She needed help, needed someone to believe her. Her finger hovered over Spencer's number, but something held her back. The memory of his dismissive attitude, his insistence that she needed help, made her hesitate. Instead, she scrolled down to another name, Ivana. Her cousin had always been her confidant, her rock. If anyone would believe her, it would be Ivana. With shaking fingers, Kaylee dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before Ivana's warm voice came on the line. "Kaylee, is everything okay?" At the sound of her cousin's concerned tone, Kaylee felt the dam inside her break. Words poured out of her in a confused jumble. The whispers at the community center, Spencer's strange behavior, the confrontation with Sarah, and finally, the terrifying encounter with Annabelle. "I don't know what's happening, Ivana," Kaylee finished, her voice cracking. "Everyone thinks I'm losing my mind, but I'm not. I swear I'm not." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a heart-stopping moment, Kaylee feared that even Ivana wouldn't believe her. But then her cousin spoke, her voice filled with a mixture of concern and determination. "Kaylee, listen to me. Don't go home. Don't call Spencer. Come to my place right now. We'll figure this out together, I promise." Relief flooded through Kaylee, so intense it left her dizzy. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'm coming." As she ended the call and stood on shaky legs, Kaylee felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in her chest. She wasn't alone. Someone believed her. And together, they would get to the bottom of whatever was happening. But even as she made her way out of the park, Kaylee couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of her troubles. Little did she know, back at Dr. Reeves's office, Annabelle was already putting the next phase of their plan into motion. Annabelle burst into Dr. Reeves's office, her face a mask of distress. "Dr. Reeves!" she cried, her voice trembling. "It's Mrs. Henderson. She's gone completely hysterical." "Doctor." Reeves rose from behind his desk, alarm evident on his face. "What happened?" "She attacked me in the parking lot," Annabelle lied smoothly, holding up her arm to show a series of scratches she had hastily inflicted on herself. "She was screaming about conspiracies, saying everyone was out to get her. Then she just ran off. I'm worried she might hurt herself or someone else." Dr. Reeves nodded gravely, reaching for his phone. "I'll call Spencer right away. We may need to consider involuntary commitment for her own safety." As Dr. Reeves dialed, Annabelle turned away to hide the triumphant smirk that played across her lips. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Meanwhile, across town, Kaylee had finally reached Ivana's apartment. Her cousin ushered her inside, her face etched with worry. "Kaylee, my God, you look terrible. What on earth is going on?" Kaylee sank onto Ivana's couch, feeling the full weight of her exhaustion and fear. "I don't know, Ivana. I feel like I'm living in some kind of nightmare. Everyone thinks I'm losing my mind, but I'm not. I swear I'm not." Ivana sat beside her, taking Kaylee's trembling hands in her own. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." And so Kaylee did. She poured out the whole story. The whispers at the community center, Spencer's increasingly distant behavior, the confrontation with Sarah, and finally, the terrifying encounter with Annabelle. As she spoke, Ivana listened intently, her brow furrowing deeper with each new detail. "This doesn't make any sense," Ivana said when Kaylee had finished. "You're one of the most stable, level-headed people I know. There's no way you'd suddenly start acting erratically without reason." Kaylee felt a wave of relief wash over her at her cousin's words. "You believe me?" "Of course I believe you," Ivana said firmly, "and we're going to get to the bottom of this. But first, you need to rest. You're safe here." As Ivana went to make up the guest room, Kaylee's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Spencer's name flashed on the screen. Her hand hovered over the phone, uncertainty gnawing at her. Should she answer? What would she say? Before she could decide, the call went to voicemail. A moment later, a text message appeared. "Kaylee, where are you? Dr. Reeves called. He's worried about you. Please come home so we can talk. I love you." Kaylee stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling within her. Part of her wanted to believe that Spencer was genuinely concerned, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, whispered that something was very, very wrong. She set the phone down without replying, her mind racing. What was really going on? Why did it feel like her entire world had turned against her almost overnight? And most importantly, What was she going to do next? As the sun began to set over San Jose, casting long shadows across the city, Kaylee Henderson found herself at a crossroads. The life she had known, the life she had loved, seemed to be crumbling around her. But with Ivana by her side, and her own determination to uncover the truth, a new chapter was about to begin, one that would test her in ways she never could have imagined. In the growing darkness, Spencer paced the floor of their home, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. Kaylee's silence was unexpected, a wrinkle in their carefully laid plans. He dialed Annabelle's number, his jaw clenched with tension. "She's not answering," he snapped, as soon as Annabelle picked up. This wasn't part of the plan. What if she's gone to the police? Annabelle's laugh was cold and confident. "Relax, darling. Even if she has, who would believe her? We've laid the groundwork too well. To everyone who matters, Kaylee Henderson is nothing more than a wealthy woman having a very public mental breakdown. It's tragic, really." As Spencer and Annabelle continued to plot, and as Kaylee tried to piece together the fragments of her shattered reality, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change all of their lives forever. The quiet streets of San Jose held no hint of the drama unfolding behind closed doors, but soon, very soon, the truth would come to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The following morning dawned with an eerie calm that belied the storm brewing in Kaylee's life. She awoke on Ivana's couch, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. As she sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, Ivana emerged from the kitchen, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in hand. "How are you feeling?" Ivana asked, handing Kaylee a mug. Kaylee took a sip, savoring the warmth. "Better, I think. Clearer. Thank you for believing me, Ivana. I don't know what I'd do without you." Ivana's response was cut short by a sharp knock at the door. Both women froze, exchanging worried glances. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by a man's voice. "San Jose Police Department. Open up, please." Ivana moved to the door, opening it to reveal 2 stern-faced officers. "Can I help you?" "We're looking for Kaylee Henderson," one officer said, his eyes scanning the apartment. "We have a warrant for her arrest." Kaylee felt the mug slip from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. "Arrest on what charges?" The officers stepped into the apartment, their faces grim. "Mrs. Henderson, you're under arrest for assault and battery against Annabelle Carter, as well as for destruction of property at the San Jose Community Center." As one officer began reading Kaylee her rights, the other produced a pair of handcuffs. Kaylee stood frozen, her mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was all a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. "Wait," Ivana interjected, her voice sharp with disbelief. "There must be some mistake. Kaylee would never—" "Ma'am, please step back," the officer warned, already securing the cuffs around Kaylee's wrists. As they led her out of the apartment, Kaylee turned to Ivana, her eyes wide with fear. "Call Spencer, tell him what's happening. He'll sort this out, I know he will." Little did Kaylee know that across town, Spencer was already aware of her arrest. In fact, he was counting on it. In the sterile confines of the police station, Kaylee sat in stunned silence as the charges against her were read out. Assault on Annabelle Carter, destruction of property at the community center, erratic and dangerous behavior. Each accusation felt like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and disoriented. "Mrs. Henderson," the detective across from her said, his voice a mix of concern and authority, "given your condition, we're prepared to forego pressing charges if you agree to voluntary commitment for psychiatric evaluation and treatment." Kaylee's head snapped up. "My condition? What are you talking about? I'm not mentally ill," the detective sighed, sliding a folder across the table. "We have statements from multiple witnesses, including your husband and your doctor, attesting to your recent erratic behavior. Mrs. Henderson, this is for your own good." Before Kaylee could protest further, the door opened and Spencer walked in, his face a mask of concern. "Kay," he said softly, moving to her side. "It's okay. We're going to get you the help you need." "Spencer," Kaylee breathed, relief flooding through her. "Thank God you're here. You have to tell them this is all a mistake. I didn't do any of those things." But Spencer just shook his head sadly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Kaylee, honey, you're not well. You need help. Dr. Reeves is waiting at the hospital. He's going to take good care of you." Kaylee stared at her husband in disbelief, a cold dread seeping into her bones. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Yet as she looked from Spencer to the detective and back again, she realized with growing horror that she was trapped. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. Spencer squeezed her shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "It's going to be okay, Kay. I've already signed the commitment papers. You'll get the best care possible, I promise." The next few hours passed in a blur for Kaylee. She was led from the police station to a waiting ambulance, her protests falling on deaf ears. As the vehicle wound its way through the streets of San Jose, Kaylee pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching her familiar world slip away. At Brookhaven Psychiatric Hospital, Kaylee was processed with clinical efficiency. Her clothes were taken, replaced with a pale blue hospital gown. Her jewelry, including her wedding ring, was catalogued and stored. With each item removed, Kaylee felt another piece of her identity slipping away. Dr. Reeves met her in a stark white examination room, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mrs. Henderson," he began, "I know this is difficult, but I want you to know that you're in good hands here. We're going to help you get better." Kaylee stared at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sick. Why won't anyone believe me?" Dr. Reeves made a note on his clipboard. "Denial is common in cases like yours, Mrs. Henderson, but with time and treatment, I'm confident we can help you accept your condition and begin the healing process." As she was led to her room, a sparse, sterile space with a single bed and barred windows, Kaylee felt as though she had stepped into a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. How had her life unraveled so completely in just a matter of days? The first week at Brookhaven was a haze of group therapy sessions, one-on-one evaluations, and a cocktail of medications that left Kaylee feeling foggy and disconnected. She went through the motions, answering questions with a detached air, all the while trying to make sense of what had happened to her. It was during a routine physical examination that Dr. Chen, a kind-faced cardiologist, made a discovery that would change everything. "Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Chen said, her brow furrowed as she studied the results of Kaylee's tests, "I'm concerned about some irregularities in your heart rhythm. I'd like to run some more comprehensive tests." The following days were a whirlwind of scans, blood work, and anxious waiting. Finally, Dr. Chen called Kaylee into her office, her face grave. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news, Mrs. Henderson. You have a rare condition called arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy. It's a progressive heart disease that, if left untreated, can be life-threatening." Kaylee sat in stunned silence as Dr. Chen explained the details of her condition, the treatment options, and the prognosis. The words washed over her. Genetic predisposition, ventricular arrhythmias, sudden cardiac death, each more terrifying than the last. How long?" Kaylee finally managed to ask. "Doctor," Chen's eyes softened with compassion, "without aggressive treatment, and given the advanced stage of your condition, I'd estimate no more than 2 to 3 months." The news of Kaylee's diagnosis spread through Brookhaven like wildfire. Suddenly, the staff's attitude towards her shifted. The suspicion and clinical detachment were replaced with pity and gentle handling. But for Kaylee, the diagnosis was a cruel irony. She had finally been believed about something, but it was a truth far more terrible than the lies that had landed her in Brookhaven. As Kaylee grappled with her mortality, across town, Spencer and Annabelle were celebrating their victory. In the opulent penthouse that Spencer had purchased with Kaylee's money, transferred to his control through a series of forged documents and falsified power of attorney claims, champagne flowed freely. "To us," Annabelle purred, clinking her crystal flute against Spencer's, "and to dear unstable Kaylee, may she rest in peace, eventually." Spencer laughed, but there was a hollow note to it. "It almost seems too easy, doesn't it? All those years of planning, and now we have everything we ever wanted," Annabelle finished, running a hand down Spencer's chest. "The money, the lifestyle, each other. We won, Spencer. Enjoy it." As they toasted their success, neither Spencer nor Annabelle could have imagined the storm that was brewing, a storm with Ivana at its center. Back at Brookhaven, Kaylee received her first visitor since her commitment. Ivana swept into the visitor's room, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Kaylee," she breathed, pulling her cousin into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry it took me so long to get here. They wouldn't let me see you at first, said you were too unstable for visitors." Kaylee clung to Ivana, feeling the first real human warmth she'd experienced in weeks. "Ivana, you have to help me. None of this is right. I'm not crazy, I swear I'm not. Ivana pulled back, her eyes searching Kaylee's face. I know you're not. I never believed it for a second. But Kaylee, there's something you need to know. Over the next hour, Ivana laid out everything she had discovered. How she had hired a private investigator to look into the circumstances of Kaylee's arrest. How the investigator had uncovered discrepancies in the witness statements, inconsistencies in the timeline of events. And there's more, Ivana said, her voice low and urgent. The investigator found evidence of large transfers from your accounts to Spencer's. Kaylee, I think Spencer might be behind all of this. Kaylee sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. Could it be true? Had the man she loved, the man she had built a life with, betrayed her so completely? As the reality of her situation sank in, something shifted inside Kaylee. The fog of confusion and despair that had clouded her mind began to clear, replaced by a steely resolve. Ivana, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, I need you to do something for me. I need you to hire the best lawyer you can find. And I need you to get me every piece of evidence that investigator uncovered. Ivana nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. What are you going to do? Kaylee's eyes flashed with determination. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to take back my life, my money, and my dignity, and then I'm going to make Spencer pay for what he's done. As Ivana left, promising to return soon with the resources Kaylee needed, a new chapter began to unfold. In her sterile hospital room, with the ticking clock of her heart condition a constant reminder of the stakes, Kaylee Henderson began to plan her comeback. She knew the odds were stacked against her. She was still legally committed. Her fortune was in Spencer's hands and her health was failing. But Kaylee had always been a fighter, and now, with nothing left to lose, she was more determined than ever. That night, as she lay in her narrow hospital bed, Kaylee made a vow to herself. She would uncover the truth, clear her name, and reclaim her life. And if her time was truly running out, she would make damn sure that her last act in this world would be to see justice done. Little did Spencer and Annabelle know, as they lounged in their ill-gotten luxury, that their perfect plan was about to unravel. The woman they had underestimated, the woman they thought they had destroyed, was rising from the ashes, and she was coming for them with everything she had left. In the days that followed, Kaylee threw herself into building her case. With Ivana's help, she began to gather evidence piece by piece. The private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Frank Delgado, proved to be an invaluable ally. Through a series of clandestine meetings in Brookhaven's visitors' room, Delgado shared his findings with Kaylee and Ivana. Your husband's been busy, Mrs. Henderson, Delgado growled, sliding a thick folder across the table. Forged signatures, backdated documents, a whole paper trail designed to make you look incompetent and transfer control of your assets to him. Kaylee leafed through the documents, her heart pounding. There, in black and white, was the proof of Spencer's betrayal. Transfer orders for millions of dollars, power of attorney documents with her forged signature, even medical reports from Dr. Reeves attesting to her unstable mental state dating back months before her commitment. And there's more, Delgado continued, his voice low. That Annabelle woman? She's no random acquaintance. I've got photos of her and your husband going back at least 2 years. They've been planning this for a long time, Mrs. Henderson. Kaylee felt as though she had been punched in the gut. 2 years. While she had been building a life with Spencer, teaching art and volunteering, he had been plotting her downfall with another woman. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. What about the community center? Kaylee asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The accusations about my behavior there. Delgado shook his head, disgust evident on his face. All fabricated. I interviewed some of the staff and students. Most of them were genuinely confused about why you'd been asked to leave. The few who corroborated the story about your erratic behavior all had connections to Annabelle. She'd been volunteering there for months, laying the groundwork. As the full picture of Spencer and Annabelle's deception came into focus, Kaylee felt a strange calm settle over her. The hurt and betrayal were still there, a dull ache in her chest, but they were overshadowed by a burning determination to set things right. What do we do now? Ivana asked, her hand squeezing Kaylee's in support. Kaylee took a deep breath, her mind racing. We need a lawyer, a good one. Someone who can help us navigate both the criminal charges and the financial aspects of this mess. Ivana nodded. I've been in touch with Catherine Zhao. She's one of the top criminal defense attorneys in California. with experience in financial fraud cases. She's willing to take on your case, Kaylee. For the first time in weeks, Kaylee felt a glimmer of hope. With Ivana's unwavering support, Delgado's evidence, and a top-notch lawyer on her side, she had a fighting chance. But even as they began to build their case, a new complication arose. Dr. Chen called Kaylee in for another consultation, her face grave as she delivered the news. "The latest tests show your condition is progressing faster than we initially thought, Mrs. Henderson. I'm afraid we're looking at weeks now, not months." The words hit Kaylee like a physical blow. Weeks. She had weeks to undo the damage Spencer had done, to reclaim her life and her dignity. The clock was ticking louder than ever. As she lay in her bed that night, Kaylee felt the weight of her mortality pressing down on her. She thought of all the things she had wanted to do with her life, the art she had yet to create, the students she had hoped to inspire, the difference she had wanted to make in the world. And now, it seemed, her final act would be this: a desperate race against time to expose the truth and see justice done. But as the first light of dawn crept through her window, Kaylee made a decision. She would not go gentle into that good night. She would rage against the dying of the light with every ounce of strength she had left. Spencer and Annabelle had underestimated her once. They would not do so again. With renewed determination, Kaylee threw herself into her fight. Working with Catherine Zhao, she began to build a case that would not only clear her name, but expose Spencer and Annabelle's elaborate scheme. Meanwhile, across town, Spencer and Annabelle were riding high on their success. They had moved into a sprawling mansion in the hills overlooking Silicon Valley, their days filled with lavish parties and expensive indulgences. "To think," Annabelle mused one evening, swirling a glass of $100 wine, "a month ago we were still plotting and planning, and now look at us." Spencer nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. "It almost seems too easy, doesn't it?" Kaylee tucked away in Brookhaven, her fortune in our hands and not a soul suspecting a thing. But even as they toasted their victory, the seeds of their downfall were being sown. In her room at Brookhaven, Kaylee was preparing for the fight of her life. And this time, she would not be caught off guard. As the sun set over San Jose, casting long shadows across the city, two very different scenes were unfolding. In a mansion on the hill, Spencer and Annabelle reveled in their ill-gotten gains, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. And in a small hospital room, Kaylee Henderson, armed with the truth and a fierce determination, prepared to take back everything that had been stolen from her. The stage was set for a showdown that would shake the foundations of San Jose's high society and expose the dark underbelly of greed and betrayal lurking beneath its polished surface. As days turned into weeks, Kaylee's legal team worked tirelessly to build their case. Catherine Zhao, with her razor-sharp mind and years of experience, pored over every document, every statement, looking for the chinks in Spencer and Annabelle's armor. "We've got them on the financial fraud," Catherine explained during one of their strategy sessions. "The paper trail is clear, and with Mr. Delgado's evidence, we can prove the signatures were forged, but the mental health accusations, that's where it gets tricky." Kaylee nodded, her face pale but determined. "Dr. Reeves was in on it. He had to be. Is there any way we can prove that?" Catherine's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "We're working on it. We've subpoenaed his records and we're looking into his background. If there's a connection between him and Spencer or Annabelle, we'll find it." As they strategized, Kaylee couldn't help but be aware of the constant ticking clock in the background. Her health was deteriorating rapidly, each day a struggle against the betrayal of her own body. But she refused to give in, channeling every ounce of her remaining strength into the fight. Ivana, true to her word, had become Kaylee's rock. She visited daily, bringing updates from the outside world, and providing the emotional support Kaylee so desperately needed. It was during one of these visits that a breakthrough came. "Kaylee," Ivana said, her voice tight with excitement. "Frank found something big." She pulled out her tablet, pulling up a series of emails. "These are from Dr. Reeves' personal account. Frank, well, let's just say he has his ways. Look at this exchange between Reeves and Spencer from 6 months ago." Kaylee leaned in, her heart racing as she read the damning correspondence. In black and white was proof of collusion between her husband and her doctor, discussing ways to make Kaylee appear unstable, planning out a schedule of false diagnoses and treatments. "This is it," Kaylee breathed, her hands shaking. "This proves it was all planned, all a lie." Ivana nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We've got them, Kaylee, we finally got them." With this new evidence in hand, Catherine Zhao moved quickly. She filed motions to have Kaylee's commitment reviewed, presenting the emails as proof of malicious intent and medical malpractice. The judge, shocked by the revelations, ordered an immediate hearing. The day of the hearing dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging within Kaylee. As she was escorted into the courtroom, she caught her first glimpse of Spencer in weeks. He sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. Beside him, Annabelle fidgeted nervously, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an anxious rhythm on the table. As Catherine laid out their case, methodically presenting evidence of the elaborate scheme, Kaylee watched the color drain from Spencer's face. His lawyer attempted to object, to discredit the evidence, but the judge overruled him at every turn. When it was Spencer's turn to testify, he tried to maintain the facade of a concerned husband, claiming he had only acted out of love and worry for Kaylee's well-being. But under Catherine's skillful cross-examination, his story began to unravel. "Mr. Henderson," Catherine said, her voice sharp as a blade, "can you explain these emails between yourself and Dr. Reeves discussing ways to make your wife appear unstable?" Spencer stammered, his cool facade cracking. That's not... You're taking those out of context." But it was too late. The truth was out, laid bare for all to see. As the judge delivered his ruling, declaring Kaylee's commitment unlawful and ordering a full investigation into Spencer, Dr. Reeves and Annabelle's actions, Kaylee felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was free. Her name was cleared. But the victory was bittersweet, tempered by the knowledge of her failing health and the betrayal of the man she had loved. As she stepped out of the courthouse, blinking in the bright California sun, Kaylee knew her fight wasn't over. There were still battles to be won. Reclaiming her fortune, seeing Spencer and his co-conspirators brought to justice, and most pressing of all, coming to terms with her own mortality. But for now, for this moment, she allowed herself to savor her victory. With Ivana's supportive arm around her waist and the knowledge that she had exposed the truth against all odds, Kaylee Henderson faced the future with renewed strength and determination. The story of her fight for justice had only just begun, and San Jose would never be the same again. As the dust settled from the initial hearing, Kaylee found herself thrust into a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical treatments, and emotional upheaval. The quiet life she had once known seemed like a distant memory as she navigated this new, tumultuous reality. Frank Delgado, the gruff private investigator who had been instrumental in uncovering the initial evidence against Spencer and Annabelle, dove deeper into his investigation with renewed vigor. His office, a cluttered space in downtown San Jose, became a hub of activity as he pieced together the intricate web of deceit that had ensnared Kaylee. One humid afternoon, Frank called Kaylee and Ivana to his office, his voice gruff with excitement. "Ladies, I think we've hit the mother lode," he said as they entered, gesturing to a board covered in photos, documents, and red string connecting various points. "What have you found, Frank?" Kaylee asked, her eyes scanning the chaotic display. Frank pointed to a grainy photograph of Spencer and Annabelle. "This was taken 2 years ago at a charity gala in New York. They claim they met 6 months ago, but this proves they've known each other much longer." Ivana leaned in, her brow furrowed. "But why New York? Spencer never mentioned traveling there." "That's where it gets interesting," Frank continued, his finger tracing a line to another document. "I dug into Annabelle's background. Turns out she used to work for a company called Vertex Financial. Ring any bells?" Kaylee gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's the firm that approached my father about a merger years ago. He turned them down because he thought their practices were unethical." Frank nodded grimly. "Exactly. And guess who was on the board of directors at Vertex? None other than Dr. Reeves." The pieces were falling into place, revealing a conspiracy more extensive and long-standing than any of them had imagined. Spencer hadn't just been after Kaylee's money. He had been part of a larger scheme to gain control of the Prescott fortune and tech empire. As Frank continued to uncover layer after layer of the plot, Kaylee found herself grappling with the magnitude of the betrayal. The man she had loved, the life she had built, it had all been based on a lie. The realization was devastating, but instead of breaking her, it fueled her determination to see justice done. Despite the emotional turmoil and her rapidly declining health, Kaylee threw herself into preparing for the upcoming trial. She worked closely with Catherine Zhao, reviewing evidence, practicing her testimony, and steeling herself for the grueling court battles ahead. One particularly difficult day, as Kaylee struggled with the side effects of her heart medication, Ivana found her cousin slumped over a stack of legal documents, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Kaylee," Ivana murmured, rushing to her side. "You need to rest, you're pushing yourself too hard." Kaylee looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with a fierce light. "I can't rest, Ivana. Not when there's so much at stake. I need to see this through. I need to make sure Spencer and Annabelle pay for what they've done." Ivana sat beside her, taking Kaylee's trembling hands in her own. "And you will. But you don't have to do it alone. That's why I'm here. That's why we have Catherine and Frank. We're all in this fight with you." As Kaylee leaned into her cousin's embrace, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Through all the turmoil, Ivana had been her constant, her rock. Their bond, always strong, had been tempered by this ordeal into something unbreakable. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Kaylee whispered. Ivana squeezed her gently. "You'll never have to find out. I'm not going anywhere." As the weeks passed, Kaylee's strength waxed and waned, but her resolve never faltered. She underwent grueling medical treatments, each one a painful reminder of her mortality, but she refused to let her condition define her or derail her quest for justice. Dr. Chen, monitoring Kaylee's heart condition closely, marveled at her patient's resilience. "I've never seen anyone fight so hard," she confided to Ivana during one of Kaylee's checkups. "By all medical standards, she shouldn't be able to keep up this pace, but it's like she's running on sheer willpower." Indeed, Kaylee's determination seemed to defy the limits of her failing body. She pored over legal documents, participated in strategy sessions with Catherine, and even began painting again, small, intense works that captured the tumult of emotions she was experiencing. One of these paintings caught Catherine's eye during a meeting at Kaylee's new apartment, a small, secure place Ivana had helped her rent after her release from Brookhaven. The canvas was a swirl of dark blues and greys, shot through with streaks of vibrant gold. "It's beautiful," Catherine remarked, studying the piece. "What do you call it?" Kaylee's lips curved in a small smile. "Phoenix Rising," she replied softly. "So it's how I feel some days, like I'm being reborn from the ashes of my old life." As the trial date loomed closer, the pressure intensified. Spencer and Annabelle's legal team launched an aggressive campaign to discredit Kaylee, leaking stories to the press about her mental instability and painting Spencer as a devoted husband trying to protect his wife's fortune from her own erratic behavior. The media frenzy was overwhelming. Kaylee couldn't leave her apartment without being accosted by reporters shouting questions and photographers snapping pictures. The constant scrutiny and the vicious lies being spread about her were a heavy burden to bear. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of depositions, Kaylee sat on her small balcony, looking out over the twinkling lights of San Jose. Ivana joined her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "How are you holding up?" Ivana asked softly. Kaylee was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "I'm tired, Ivana, so tired. Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. Maybe I should just—" "Don't you dare finish that thought," Ivana interrupted fiercely. "You are Kaylee Henderson. You are strong, you are brave, and you are going to win this fight." Kaylee turned to look at her cousin, tears shimmering in her eyes. "But what if I don't? What if after all this Spencer and Annabelle still win? What if I die before I can see justice done?" Ivana knelt beside Kaylee's chair, taking her hands. "Listen to me. You've already won. You've exposed their lies. You've shown the world who you really are, not the unstable woman they tried to paint you as, but a fighter, a survivor. No matter what happens in that courtroom, you've already proven them wrong." Kaylee nodded slowly, drawing strength from Ivana's words and unwavering support. She was right. Whatever the outcome of the trial, Kaylee had reclaimed her truth. She had risen above the betrayal and deceit, and in doing so, had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. As the trial date drew nearer, the tension in San Jose was palpable. The case had captured the public's imagination, with its tale of betrayal, greed, and a woman's fight against seemingly insurmountable odds. People were taking sides, debating the case in coffee shops and on social media platforms. Catherine Zhao worked tirelessly, refining their strategy and preparing for every possible scenario. Spencer's team is going to try to paint you as unstable again, she warned Kaylee during one of their final prep sessions. They're going to bring up your time in Brookhaven, try to use your heart condition against you. Are you ready for that? Kaylee nodded, her jaw set with determination. I'm ready. They've taken so much from me, but they can't take my truth. I won't let them. The night before the trial, Kaylee found herself unable to sleep. She stood by her window, looking out at the city she had once loved so unconditionally. San Jose had been her home, the place where she had built her life with Spencer. Now it felt like a battleground, every street and building holding memories both sweet and painful. As she stood there, lost in thought, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number. With trembling fingers, Kaylee opened the message. I know the truth. I want to help. Meet me at sunrise at the Rose Garden. Come alone. A friend. Kaylee's heart raced as she read and reread the cryptic message. Could this be the break they had been hoping for? Or was it a trap set by Spencer and Annabelle? She debated waking Ivana, who was sleeping in the guest room, or calling Catherine. But something held her back. This was her fight, her chance to take control of her destiny. Decision made, Kaylee changed into jeans and a sweater, scribbled a quick note for Ivana, and slipped out of the apartment. As she drove through the pre-dawn streets of San Jose, her mind whirled with possibilities. Who was this mysterious friend? What truth did they know? The municipal rose garden was eerily beautiful in the soft light of dawn, the flowers just beginning to open their petals to the new day. Kaylee walked slowly along the paths, her senses on high alert, searching for any sign of her mysterious correspondent, Mrs. Henderson. The soft voice behind her made Kaylee jump. She turned to find herself face to face with a woman she recognized from Spencer's law firm, a junior associate named Melissa. I'm sorry for the cloak and dagger routine, Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper, but I couldn't risk anyone knowing I was meeting you. You're the one who sent the text, Kaylee said, studying the young woman's face. You said you know the truth. What truth? Melissa glanced around nervously before pulling an envelope from her bag. I've worked for Spencer for 3 years. I always thought he was a good man, but then I overheard him and Annabelle talking. They were laughing about you, about how easy it had been to fool everyone. Kaylee's breath caught in her throat as Melissa continued. I couldn't stand by and let them get away with it, so I started gathering evidence. She held out the envelope. Emails, financial records, even recordings of conversations between Spencer and Annabelle. It's all in here. This should be enough to bury them both. With shaking hands, Kaylee took the envelope. Why? She asked softly. Why are you doing this? Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Because it's the right thing to do. And because my mother died of the same heart condition you have. She didn't get justice in her lifetime. I want to make sure you do. As the first rays of sunlight began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Kaylee felt a surge of hope, unlike anything she had experienced since this ordeal began. With this new evidence in hand, she was more ready than ever to face Spencer and Annabelle in court. Clutching the envelope to her chest, Kaylee turned to Melissa. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what this means. Melissa nodded, a small smile on her face. Good luck, Mrs. Henderson. Show them what you're made of. As Kaylee drove back to her apartment, her mind was racing. The trial was just hours away, and now armed with this new information, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Spencer and Annabelle had underestimated her once. They had thought they could break her, silence her, erase her, but they had failed to account for one crucial factor, the strength of the human spirit. Kaylee Henderson was more than just an heiress, more than a victim of betrayal. She was a fighter, a survivor, and today she would show the world, and herself, just how powerful she truly was. As she pulled into her parking spot, the sun now fully risen over San Jose, Kaylee took a deep breath. In a few hours, she would walk into that courtroom and face her accusers. She would look Spencer in the eye and show him that his betrayal had not destroyed her, but made her stronger. With the weight of the envelope in her hands and the strength of her convictions in her heart, Kaylee stepped out of her car, ready to face whatever the day might bring. The final battle was about to begin, and Kaylee Henderson was ready for war. The San Jose County Courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue California sky, its neoclassical facade a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on its steps. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras flashing incessantly as they waited for the arrival of the trial's key players. The air buzzed with anticipation, This was more than just another court case. It was the culmination of a scandal that had gripped the city for months. At precisely 8:45 a.m., a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. The crowd surged forward as Kaylee Henderson emerged, flanked by her cousin Ivana and her attorney Catherine Zhao. Kaylee's face was pale but determined, her head held high as she made her way through the sea of reporters. "Mrs. Henderson, how are you feeling about today's proceedings? Kaylee, do you have any comment on the accusations against your husband?" "Ms. Henderson, is it true that your health is failing?" The questions came rapid fire, but Kaylee remained silent, her eyes fixed on the courthouse doors. As they reached the top of the steps, Catherine turned to address the media. "My client, Mrs. Henderson, is eager for the truth to come to light. We are confident that justice will prevail. Thank you." Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Kaylee took her seat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Spencer sat with his legal team, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. Annabelle was nowhere to be seen. She would be called as a witness later in the proceedings. As Judge Miranda Holbrook entered and the court was called to order, Kaylee felt a moment of surreal detachment. How had she come to this point? Just months ago, her life had been so different, comfortable, happy, safe. Now here she sat, facing the man she had loved, fighting for her reputation, her fortune, and in many ways, her very life. Catherine's opening statement was a masterpiece of legal oratory. She painted a vivid picture of the conspiracy against Kaylee, weaving together the threads of evidence they had gathered over the past months. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Catherine began, her voice clear and confident, "what you will hear today is a tale of betrayal so profound, so calculated, that it challenges our very understanding of trust and love. Kaylee Henderson, a woman known for her generosity and kindness, was systematically deceived, gaslighted, and defrauded by the man who had vowed to love and protect her, her husband, Spencer Henderson." As Catherine laid out the details of Spencer and Annabelle's scheme, Kaylee watched the jury's reactions. She saw shock, disbelief, and growing anger in their faces. When Catherine revealed the existence of the emails between Spencer and Dr. Reeves, planning Kaylee's fake diagnosis, an audible gasp rippled through the courtroom. Spencer's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Douglas Brennan, attempted to paint Kaylee as unstable and paranoid in his opening statement, but his words seemed to lack conviction, especially in light of the evidence Catherine had presented. The parade of witnesses began. Dr. Chen testified about Kaylee's heart condition, emphasizing that it was a physical ailment with no bearing on her mental state. Former colleagues from the community center spoke about Kaylee's dedication and stable behavior, directly contradicting the picture Spencer had tried to paint. When Frank Delgado took the stand, his gruff demeanor and meticulous evidence gathering made a strong impression. He walked the court through his investigation, revealing the long-standing connection between Spencer, Annabelle, and Dr. Reeves. "In my 30 years as a private investigator," Frank concluded, "I've never seen a more carefully orchestrated plot to destroy someone's life." The most dramatic moment came when Melissa, the whistleblower from Spencer's firm, was called to testify. Her hands shook as she was sworn in, but her voice was steady as she recounted what she had overheard and the evidence she had gathered. "I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy Mrs. Henderson," Melissa said, her eyes filling with tears. "What they did, it was evil, pure evil." As Melissa's testimony concluded, Kaylee glanced at Spencer. For the first time since the trial began, she saw a crack in his composed facade. He was pale, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. The media frenzy outside the courthouse grew with each new revelation. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Justice for Kaylee" and "Spencer the Snake." Public opinion, which had been divided at the start of the trial, was swinging decisively in Kaylee's favor. When Annabelle finally took the stand, her carefully crafted image of the concerned friend crumbled under Catherine's skillful cross-examination. Caught in multiple lies and contradictions, Annabelle finally broke down. "Fine," she shouted, her face contorted with rage. "Yes, we planned it all. That stupid, naive little rich girl, she made it so easy. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch someone who has everything and appreciates nothing? She deserved what she got." The courtroom erupted in chaos at Annabelle's outburst. Judge Holbrook called for order, her gavel echoing through the stunned silence that followed. As the trial entered its final days, Kaylee's health took a drastic turn for the worse. The stress and emotional toll of the proceedings had exacerbated her heart condition. Dr. Chen insisted on checking her over during every recess, her face growing more concerned with each examination. "Kaylee," Dr. Chen said softly after one such checkup, "I need you to understand how serious this is. Your heart, it's failing faster than we anticipated. You need to be in the hospital, on full-time monitoring." But Kaylee shook her head, her jaw set with determination. "Not until this is over, Dr. Chen. I need to see this through." On the final day of the trial, as closing arguments were set to begin, Kaylee knew she was nearing her limit. Her vision swam, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. But she refused to show weakness, channeling every ounce of her remaining strength into sitting upright, her eyes fixed on the jury. Catherine's closing argument was passionate and compelling. She wove together all the threads of evidence, painting a damning picture of Spencer and Annabelle's actions. As she spoke, Kaylee could see the jury nodding, their faces set with resolve. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Catherine concluded, "you have the power to right a terrible wrong, to show that in this world, truth and justice can still prevail over greed and deceit. Kaylee Henderson has fought against impossible odds to be here today, to seek the justice she deserves. I ask you now to grant her that justice. Thank you." As the jury filed out to begin their deliberations, a hush fell over the courtroom. Kaylee closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. She felt Ivana's hand on her shoulder, a gentle, reassuring presence. "You did it, Kaylee," Ivana whispered. "No matter what happens now, you stood up and fought. I'm so proud of you." The wait for the verdict was excruciating. Hours ticked by, feeling like an eternity. Finally, as the sun was setting over San Jose, word came that the jury had reached a decision. As Judge Holbrook read out the verdict, Kaylee felt as though she were floating outside her body. Guilty. Spencer and Annabelle were found guilty on all counts. The forfeiture of all assets gained through their fraud was ordered, along with substantial punitive damages. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Kaylee sat still, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her victory washed over her. She had done it. She had reclaimed her truth, her dignity, her legacy. But as the initial euphoria faded, Kaylee became acutely aware of the pain in her chest, the struggle to draw each breath. As Catherine and Ivana hugged her, their faces beaming with joy, Kaylee knew with a sudden, stark clarity that her time was running out. "I need to go home," she whispered to Ivana. "There are things I need to do." The next few days passed in a blur. Kaylee, against Dr. Chen's strenuous objections, refused hospitalization. Instead, she threw herself into putting her affairs in order. She met with her lawyer, making significant changes to her will. "I want to create a foundation," she explained, her voice weak but her eyes bright with purpose. "The Kaylee Henderson Foundation for Arts and Justice. It will fund art programs for underprivileged children and provide legal aid to victims of fraud and abuse." She designated Ivana as the foundation's director, knowing her cousin would honor her vision. The bulk of her fortune would go to funding the foundation, with smaller bequests to the friends and colleagues who had stood by her through her ordeal. As for Spencer and Annabelle, Kaylee had one final act of justice in mind. She instructed her lawyer to set aside a small sum, a pittance compared to what they had tried to steal from her, with very specific instructions for its disbursement. On a warm evening, exactly 1 week after the verdict, Kaylee asked Ivana to help her out onto the balcony of her apartment. The sun was setting over San Jose, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Kaylee murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Ivana nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew, as did Kaylee, that this would be her cousin's last sunset. "I want you to know," Kaylee said, turning to look at Ivana, "that I don't regret any of it. The pain, the struggle, it was all worth it. Because in fighting this battle, I found out who I really am, who my true friends are." She squeezed Ivana's hand. "I found out what real love looks like." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Kaylee Henderson took her final breath. She died as she had lived these last months, with dignity, courage, and an unshakable spirit. The news of Kaylee's passing sent shockwaves through San Jose and beyond. The media, which had been following every twist and turn of her story, exploded with tributes and retrospectives. Kaylee Henderson, they said, was more than just an heiress or a victim. She was a symbol of resilience, of the triumph of truth over deceit. In the days that followed, As the city mourned, whispers began to circulate about Kaylee's will. What final statement had she made? How would she be remembered? The date for the will reading was set, and once again, all eyes turned to the Henderson case. As Kaylee's lawyer prepared to reveal her final wishes, friends, family, and strangers alike held their breath, waiting to see how Kaylee Henderson's extraordinary story would end. Little did they know, Kaylee had ensured that her story was far from over. Her legacy, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, was about to take flight in ways that would impact lives for generations to come. The day of the will reading dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the somber mood that had settled over San Jose in the wake of Kaylee Henderson's passing. The conference room at the law offices of Zhao and Associates was packed to capacity, a mix of family members, friends, media representatives, and curious onlookers, all eager to hear Kaylee's final wishes. At the back of the room, flanked by two stern-faced guards, sat Spencer Henderson. His once immaculate appearance was now disheveled, his designer suit replaced by a rumpled shirt and tie. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, perhaps haunted by the magnitude of his betrayal. Despite his fall from grace, a glimmer of hope still shone in his eyes. Surely, he thought, Kaylee would have left something for him. 15 years of marriage couldn't be erased so easily, could they? As Catherine Zhao stepped to the podium, a hush fell over the room. She cleared her throat, her face a mask of professional composure, despite the emotion of the moment. "We are gathered here today to honor the final wishes of Kaylee Henderson," Catherine began, her voice strong and clear. "Before we proceed with the reading of the will, Mrs. Henderson left specific instructions for an item to be delivered to Mr. Spencer Henderson." A murmur rippled through the crowd as a small ornate safe was brought forward and placed on the table in front of Spencer. His brow furrowed in confusion as he looked at the familiar object. It was a gift he had given Kaylee on their 5th anniversary. Mrs. Henderson stipulated that this safe should be opened here, in the presence of all gathered, Catherine continued. She nodded to one of the guards, who stepped forward with a key. As the safe clicked open, Spencer leaned forward eagerly. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single object, a simple white coffee mug. Taped to the side of the mug was an envelope with Spencer's name written in Kaylee's elegant script. With trembling hands, Spencer opened the envelope and began to read the letter aloud, his voice growing more unsteady with each word. "Dear Spencer, for you, I leave this cup of cold, bitter coffee, a fitting representation of the love you offered me. Once it was warm and sweet, full of promise, but like your affection, it has grown cold and unpalatable with time. I want you to know that despite everything, I don't hate you. Hate requires energy, and you are not worth that investment. Instead, I feel pity for you. Pity that you never understood the true value of what we had, that you were so blinded by greed that you threw away something genuine for a hollow imitation of success. As you sit in your cell in the coming years, I hope you'll reflect on the choices that brought you here. I hope you'll think of the life we could have had, the love you discarded, and the trust you shattered. And I hope that one day you'll understand the magnitude of what you lost. You thought you could break me, Spencer. You thought you could erase me, but in trying to destroy me, you only made me stronger. My legacy will live on long after both of us are gone, touching lives and making a difference in ways you never could have imagined. Goodbye, Spencer. May you find peace with your choices, and may the bitterness of this coffee remind you of the sweetness you threw away. Kaylee." As Spencer finished reading, his voice had dwindled to a hoarse whisper. The room was deathly silent, the weight of Kaylee's words hanging heavy in the air. Spencer slumped in his chair, the letter slipping from his fingers as the full impact of his actions finally, truly hit him. In that moment, surrounded by the people whose lives he had upended, Spencer Henderson broke. Sobs racked his body as years of calculated deceit gave way to raw, unfiltered remorse. The man who had once stood tall and proud, confident in his ability to manipulate and control, was reduced to a shell of his former self. The guards shifted uncomfortably, unused to seeing such a display from the normally composed former lawyer. As Spencer's breakdown continued, Catherine cleared her throat, drawing attention back to the podium. "We will now proceed with the reading of Mrs. Henderson's will," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. What followed was a testament to Kaylee's generosity and vision. The bulk of her considerable fortune was to be used to establish the Kaylee Henderson Foundation for Arts and Justice. The foundation would have two main focuses. funding art programs for underprivileged children, and providing legal aid to victims of fraud and abuse. "It is Mrs. Henderson's wish," Catherine read, "that her experience be used as a force for good, to prevent others from suffering as she did, and to provide opportunities for those who might otherwise be overlooked." Ivana was named as the foundation's director, a responsibility she accepted with tears in her eyes and determination in her heart. Smaller bequests were made to friends and colleagues who had stood by Kaylee during her ordeal, the art students who had believed in her, the medical staff who had cared for her, even Frank Delgado, the gruff private investigator who had helped uncover the truth. As Catherine continued to read, detailing the various charitable donations and endowments Kaylee had set up, the mood in the room began to shift. The sorrow and shock that had permeated the gathering slowly gave way to a sense of awe and inspiration. Even in death, Kaylee Henderson was touching lives, creating opportunities and fighting for justice. When the reading concluded, there was a moment of profound silence before the room erupted in conversation. Reporters rushed out, eager to share the details of Kaylee's extraordinary final act. Friends and family members embraced, their grief mingled with pride in Kaylee's legacy. In the days and weeks that followed, the impact of Kaylee's will reverberated through San Jose and beyond. The media, which had followed every twist and turn of the Henderson saga, now turned their attention to the potential impact of the Kaylee Henderson Foundation. Local news stations ran features on the first recipients of the foundation's art grants, children from underprivileged neighborhoods whose eyes lit up at the prospect of art classes and supplies. Legal aid clinics funded by the foundation began to take on cases of fraud and abuse, providing hope to those who might otherwise have nowhere to turn. Meanwhile, the legal system was not finished with Spencer and Annabelle. In addition to the civil penalties levied against them, both faced criminal charges for their roles in the conspiracy against Kaylee. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Spencer, his arrogance shattered and his spirit broken, offered no defense. He pleaded guilty to all charges, his voice barely audible as he admitted to each count of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse. The judge, unmoved by his apparent remorse, sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison. Annabelle, ever the fighter, attempted to shift blame and minimize her role. But with Spencer's confession and the mountain of evidence against her, her efforts were in vain. She received 15 years, her face a mask of fury as she was led from the courtroom. As Spencer was escorted to the prison transport, a reporter called out, asking if he had any final words. Spencer paused, turning to face the cameras. Gone was the polished, confident lawyer. In his place stood a man hollowed out by his own actions, the weight of his choices etched into every line of his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "To Kaylee, to her family, to everyone I hurt. I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry." With that, he was gone, swallowed up by the justice system he had once manipulated so skillfully. The public's fascination with the Henderson case didn't end with the sentencing. Kaylee's story had captured the imagination of people around the world. She became a symbol of resilience, of the triumph of truth over deceit. Books were written, documentaries filmed, all attempting to capture the essence of the woman who had fought so hard for justice. But perhaps the most profound impact of Kaylee's legacy was felt in the lives of those directly touched by her foundation. In a low-income neighborhood of San Jose, a community center that had been on the verge of closing its doors received a grant to expand its art programs. Children who had never held a paintbrush discovered hidden talents, their worlds expanding with each stroke of color. Maria Rodriguez, a 12-year-old participant in one of these programs, summed it up best in an interview with a local news station. "Before, I didn't think art was for people like me," she said, her eyes shining as she showed off her latest painting. "But now, thanks to Mrs. Henderson, I know I can be an artist. I can be anything I want to be." Across town, in a small legal aid office, Sarah Chen worked tirelessly on cases of fraud and elder abuse. A recent law school graduate, Sarah had been inspired by Kaylee's story to focus on helping those who had been taken advantage of by people they trusted. "Every time we win a case, every time we help someone reclaim their life, I think of Kaylee Henderson," Sarah shared. "She showed us that one person can make a difference, that fighting for what's right is always worth it." As the first anniversary of Kaylee's passing approached, Ivana organized a memorial event at the San Jose Museum of Art. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a collection of Kaylee's own paintings, including the powerful phoenix rising she had created during her legal battle. Standing before the painting, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by Kaylee's generosity, Ivana felt a bittersweet mix of sorrow and pride. Kaylee always saw the beauty in the world, even when that world was cruel to her, she said in her opening speech. Through this foundation, through all of you, her vision of a more just, more beautiful world lives on. The event was attended by hundreds, from art students and legal aid recipients to local dignitaries and national media. As people moved through the exhibit, admiring Kaylee's work and learning about the foundation's impact, there was a palpable sense of hope and inspiration in the air. One of the most poignant moments came when Dr. Chen, the cardiologist who had cared for Kaylee in her final months, unveiled a new initiative funded by the foundation. The Kaylee Henderson Heart Health Program would provide screenings and treatment for underserved communities, potentially saving countless lives. Kaylee's heart may have failed her in the end, Dr. Chen said, her voice thick with emotion. But her heart, her compassion, her spirit, these things live on in every life touched by her generosity. As the sun set on that day of remembrance, casting a warm glow over the city Kaylee had called home, it was clear that her story was far from over. In art studios and courtrooms, in community centers and hospitals, Kaylee Henderson's legacy continued to grow, touching lives and inspiring change in ways she might never have imagined. The woman who had once been betrayed and nearly destroyed had, in the end, created something indestructible. Kaylee Henderson had transformed her pain into purpose, her tragedy into triumph, and in doing so, she had ensured that her story, a story of resilience, of justice, of the power of the human spirit, would be told and retold for generations to come. In the quiet of the museum, as the last visitors filed out, Ivana stood alone before Kaylee's phoenix rising. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the canvas, tracing the swirls of dark blues and grays shot through with vibrant gold. "You did it, Kaylee," she whispered, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "You rose from the ashes, and you lifted so many others with you." As Ivana turned to leave, she noticed a young girl standing in the doorway, sketchbook clutched to her chest, eyes wide with wonder as she gazed at Kaylee's painting. "Would you like to hear about the artist?" Ivana asked gently. The girl nodded eagerly, and as Ivana began to speak, to share Kaylee's story once more, she knew that this moment, this connection, this passing of inspiration from one generation to the next, this was the true heart of Kaylee's legacy. And so, as night fell over San Jose, Kaylee Henderson's story continued to unfold, a testament to the enduring power of truth, justice, and the unbreakable spirit of those who dare to rise above adversity. 5 years after Kaylee Henderson's passing, San Jose had transformed in ways both visible and intangible. The Kaylee Henderson Foundation for Arts and Justice had become a beacon of hope and change, its influence stretching far beyond the city limits. On a crisp autumn morning, Ivana stood before a crowd gathered at the newly inaugurated Kaylee Henderson Center for the Arts. The sleek modern building stood as a testament to Kaylee's vision, its walls adorned with vibrant murals created by local artists and students. 5 years ago, Ivana began, her voice strong and clear, we lost a remarkable woman. But today, as I look around at all we've accomplished in Kaylee's name, I see that we've gained so much more. Her spirit lives on in every brushstroke, every legal victory, every life touched by her legacy. The center was a hub of activity, offering free art classes to underprivileged youth, hosting exhibitions of emerging artists, and providing a space for community gatherings. But its impact went beyond the artistic realm. In partnership with local law schools, the foundation had established a legal clinic specializing in cases of fraud and spousal abuse. The clinic had become a powerful force for justice, taking on high-profile cases and advocating for legislative changes. Sarah Chen, now the head of the legal clinic, stepped up to the podium. Thanks to the groundwork laid by Kaylee's case and the tireless efforts of our team, we've seen significant changes in how the legal system approaches cases of financial abuse and fraud within marriages. She went on to detail the Kaylee's Law, recently passed in California, which strengthened protections for spouses against financial exploitation and made it easier for victims to reclaim assets lost to fraud. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah continued, Kaylee's story has opened up a national conversation about the insidious nature of psychological and financial abuse. People are more aware, more vigilant, and more empowered to seek help. The impact of Kaylee's legacy extended into the medical field as well. Dr. Chen, now heading the Kaylee Henderson Heart Health Program, had overseen the implementation of widespread screening programs in underserved communities. In the past 5 years, Dr. Chen reported, "We've identified and treated hundreds of cases of arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, the condition that took Kaylee from us. Lives have been saved, families spared the grief that Kaylee's loved ones endured." As the ceremony continued, highlighting the various ways in which Kaylee's vision had been realized, the scene shifted to a very different setting. In a federal prison hundreds of miles away, Spencer Henderson sat alone in his cell. The years had not been kind to him. His once stylish hair was now streaked with gray, his face lined with the weight of his actions. On his small desk lay a dog-eared copy of the San Jose Mercury News, open to an article about the Kaylee Henderson Center for the Arts. Spencer's eyes skimmed the words, lingering on a photo of Ivana at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. A guard appeared at his cell door. "Henderson, you've got a visitor." Spencer looked up, surprised. He rarely received visitors these days. As he was led to the visitation area, his mind raced with possibilities. Seated at one of the tables was Maria Rodriguez, now 17 years old, her posture confident, her eyes clear and determined. Spencer hesitated before sitting down across from her. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Maria shook her head. "No, Mr. Henderson, you don't know me, but I know you. Or rather, I know what you did." She placed a sketchbook on the table, opening it to reveal a striking portrait of Kaylee. "I'm one of the many kids whose lives were changed by your wife's foundation. I'm here because I wanted you to see firsthand the impact of Kaylee's kindness and the consequences of your cruelty." Spencer stared at the portrait, his eyes filling with tears. "She always loved art," he murmured. "And now, because of her, thousands of kids like me get to love it too," Maria said. "Your actions were meant to destroy her, Mr. Henderson. Instead, they created a legacy that will outlive us all." As Maria continued to speak, sharing stories of how the foundation had changed lives, Spencer felt the full weight of his actions crash down upon him. The life he could have had, the good he could have done alongside Kaylee, all sacrificed on the altar of his greed and ambition. Back in San Jose, as the sun began to set on the day's celebrations, Ivana found herself once again standing before Kaylee's Phoenix Rising. The painting had become a symbol of the foundation's work, a reminder of the power of resilience and hope. A small group of art students had gathered around her, their young faces alight with curiosity and admiration. "Ms. Ivana," one of them asked, "do you think Kaylee knew how much she would change the world?" Ivana smiled, her hand resting gently on the frame of the painting. "I don't think Kaylee set out to change the world," she said softly. "She simply chose, every day, to be kind, to be just, to use her talents to lift others up, and in doing so, she showed us all the incredible power of one person's choices." She turned to face the students, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's the true lesson of Kaylee's life. It's not about grand gestures or global impact. It's about the choices we make every day. To be kind or cruel, to build up or tear down, to fight for justice or turn a blind eye to injustice." As the students nodded, their young faces serious and thoughtful, Ivana felt a surge of hope for the future. Kaylee's story had become more than just a cautionary tale or a symbol of triumph over adversity. It had become a call to action, inspiring a new generation to choose kindness, to fight for justice, to use their talents in service of others. Kaylee's life was cut short, Ivana concluded, but her impact will be felt for generations. Not because she was perfect or all-powerful, but because she chose, even in her darkest moments, to be a force for good in the world. As night fell over San Jose, the lights of the Kaylee Henderson Center for the Arts illuminated the surrounding neighborhood, a beacon of hope and creativity in the urban landscape. And in homes, classrooms and courtrooms across the city and beyond, Kaylee's legacy continued to unfold, a testament to the enduring power of one woman's choice to rise above cruelty and create beauty from pain. In the end, Kaylee Henderson's story was not just about justice served or a fortune reclaimed. It was a reminder of the incredible resilience of the human spirit the transformative power of kindness, and the ripple effect that one person's choices can have on the world. It was a call to all who heard it to look within themselves and ask, in the face of adversity, what will I choose, and how might that choice change the world? If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now, and we'll see you there.